Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to episode 1 of Chanakya Niti, a new limited series that will go live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. in order to help you understand Kautilyan thought and its relevance in Indian foreign policy and how we can apply Kautilya's thought in today's geopolitics. This would be a limited series where we are going to discuss few important Kautilyan theories and philosophies and apply that in today's foreign policy and today's geopolitics. So do support the new initiative with your likes and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tune in every Wednesday at 8 p.m. to catch this session as part of Chanakya Niti, a new limited series. Now first let's understand what is the objective of this series. Why are we starting this new initiative? See, if you look at political science and international relations and strategic thought in general, it is usually dominated by a Eurocentric vision. Whenever you think of political thinkers and strategic thinkers, usually the likes of Plato, Aristotle, Machiavelli comes to mind. So many Indian thinkers believe that there is a Eurocentrism in the discipline of international relations, security studies and strategic thought. This is very unfortunate because we have several leading Indian thinkers, Indian practitioners from the ancient medieval times who have laid down the concepts of power, state, diplomacy, war, etc. Unfortunately, we don't pay much attention to them and neither are their theories and philosophies that popular. Now, if you look at Kautilya, a legendary Indian thinker and strategist from the ancient times, his thought and philosophy is studied in several foreign universities even today. But however, if you look at the Indian context and if you look at the understanding that the general audience has about Kautilya and his thought, it is very limited. It's largely because the Eurocentrism seen in the discipline of political science, international relations, etc., has given more priority to Western thinkers and Western thought. So much so that Chanakya is often referred to as the Indian Machiavelli, and I strongly disagree with this because Chanakya dates back to the 3rd, 4th century BC and Machiavelli came 1800 years later. And also if you compare Kautilya and Machiavelli's thought and thinking, Kautilya provided a much more comprehensive approach to understand administration, diplomacy, war and geopolitics compared to Machiavelli. So it is grave injustice to call Kautilya as India's Machiavelli. According to me, it should be the other way around. Machiavelli should be called as Europe's Kautilya. So this is an attempt to spread more awareness about Indian strategic thought from ancient times. Talk about concepts like great power rivalry, diplomacy, statecraft, espionage, war and ethics in warfare. All these key concepts we need to understand from an Indian perspective. Because if you look at these essential concepts of political science and international relations, it is dominated by Western Christian thought, which builds the foundation of state and statecraft. There is a greater priority given in the School of Political Science and IR to thinkers like Plato, Aristotle and others, and the same priority is never given to Indian thinkers or non-Western thinkers. So this would be an attempt to bring to limelight Indian strategic thought which is relevant even today, and we will focus exclusively on Kautilya's thought. Now some of you might be thinking, how is this relevant for your exams? Let me tell you, these discussions could be immensely helpful, especially for your mains exam. When you are writing your mains answers, be it in international relations in GS paper 2 or internal security questions in GS paper 3, you can apply these discussions directly into your answers by giving it a historical perspective and by expanding the argument that you are making in your answers. As I told you, Kautilyan thought remains absolutely relevant even in contemporary Indian foreign policy and global geopolitics. So this series would make an attempt to not just help you understand Kautilyan thought, but to understand how it is relevant in today's foreign policy of India and in today's geopolitics. This could This could be very useful for students with PSIR and public administration as their optional. The same arguments and thoughts can be used in your answers for your optional subjects as well, and it could help you in your essays as well. Now, if you look at Indian strategic thought, it's not just Kautilya who has been forgotten. There are many others who don't get the right recognition as well. If you look at Thiruvalluvar and his legendary work, Tirukkural, the epic Tamil text, it talks about ethics in warfare, which today is comparable to the Geneva Conventions that talks about ethics in war and human rights. If you look at the legendary conquest of Chhatrapati Shivaji, his guerrilla warfare tactics and naval strategies against the Mughals, it finds relevance in today's naval warfare and maritime power projection. If you look at the Battle of Saraigat, the achievement of the Ahom kingdom against the Mughals, and how Lachit Borphukan came out with a naval strategy to defeat the Mughals by exploiting the weakness of the Mughals, how the Ahom kingdom employed psychological warfare and came out with military tactics to defeat the mighty Mughals. Then if you look at the expansionism and the stability brought in by the Mughal Empire in India, which involved statecraft, which involved military conquests. If you look at the naval might and the maritime power projection of the Cholas, stretching all the way across Southeast East Asia, these are remarkable achievements of ancient medieval India, and these thoughts should be applied, should be studied in today's context, and we need to learn, we need to apply them as well in today's context. In fact, I feel such a series will be very relevant because just last year, the Defense Ministry and Indian Army have launched a project with the same purpose, with the same intention, called Project Udbhav. Under this, the Indian Army and Defense Ministry are working with a think tank, the USI, to bring ancient Indian strategic thought into military thinking. This would apply for diplomacy and statecraft as well. So, as a result, I feel that this discussion would be extremely relevant for civil services aspirants. So, first let's begin by talking about Chanakya himself. A brief introduction about Chanakya, who was Chanakya, and then today we will talk about the Mandala Theory, also called the Raja Mandala Theory. So, I'll help you understand this theory and we will apply that in contemporary geopolitics. So, Chanakya was a leading Indian thinker, strategist and philosopher from ancient India who worked as the Prime Minister to Chandragupta Maurya under the Mauryan Empire. Chanakya is credited with enabling Chandragupta Maurya to establish the mighty Mauryan Empire, and even though there is a debate regarding his exact time period, his contribution with regard to the Arthashastra, it is a well established fact that Kautilyan thought, irrespective of the historical controversies, remains relevant in today's times. The controversy arises mainly due to the lack of historical evidence, and also even before Kautilya, right, there were thinkers, there were shastras that spoke about administration, warfare, statecraft, etc. So, many are of the opinion that Kautilya only compiled them and gave it a comprehensive approach. But some argue that Kautilya himself came out with these theories, and others dispute Kautilya's contribution entirely as well. But keeping those controversies aside, what is acceptable is that Arthashastra, the epic treatise, does contain valuable thought and philosophies which is relevant even today. See, many students have a wrong assumption that Arthashastra is just about administration, economics, revenue, land administration, etc. But Arthashastra is not just limited to that. Arthashastra is a collective work comprising of 15 books with thousands of sutras. Of course, many of them deal with political science, advice to the king regarding administration and governance, that includes management of the economy, that includes revenue management, land management, etc. But apart from that, there are several books in the Arthashastra dedicated to international relations, diplomacy, statecraft, warfare, espionage, covert operations. So, all these areas were touched upon in the Arthashastra, which is a epic treatise credited to Kautilya or Chanakya, also known as Vishnugupta. So, in episode number 1, we shall talk about the Mandala Theory or Raja Mandala Theory, which is one of the leading thoughts, strategic thoughts mentioned in the Arthashastra. The word mandala, it's a Sanskrit word. It refers to concentric circles. Many of you might be familiar with mandala art, or even those who draw rangolis, they use the mandala patterns. Essentially, it's a repeating pattern of circles, concentric circles. In religion and culture and spirituality, there is a lot of symbolism attached to the mandala circles, both in Hinduism and Buddhism. This pattern of concentric circles, it holds a lot of symbolic meaning and spiritual meaning as well. It symbolizes the never ending cycle of life and the universe, right. So, there is religious spiritual significance attached to the mandala, which is basically a set of concentric circles. Now, using this representation, Kautilya interpreted geopolitics. He advised the king on how to deal with neighboring states, how to counter the enemies, how to build alliances with like-minded partners to counter the common enemies. This, in a sense, is referred to as Raja Mandala Theory or Mandala Theory, referred to in the 7th book of the Arthashastra. So, let us dive a little deep into this and understand what exactly did Kautilya advise the king regarding the Mandala Theory. If you look at a kingdom, it is of course bound by neighboring kingdoms. Kautilya's first advice to the king was that always treat your immediate neighbors as possible rivals, as possible Ari states or enemy states. Now, do not think that this is a very negative, pessimistic advice. It is actually a very practical, realistic, pragmatic advice. See, when you share immediate borders with another country, right, you are going to share resources. You will be sharing land, water, the forests, the natural resources. So, when it comes to sharing of resources, disputes will arise regarding where the boundaries have to be drawn, regarding how the waters have to be divided, how the natural resources have to be shared. This quite often leads to tensions, disputes and conflicts, eventually leading to war and enmity and hostility. So, Kautilya advised the king that treat your immediate neighbors present in the immediate vicinity of the kingdom as a possible Ari state, as a possible hostile state. Now, before we look deeper into this, you need to know that the Mandala theory actually predates Kautilya. Even before Kautilya spoke about Mandala theory, Manu and even in the Rig Veda, right, the Manusmriti and even Rig Veda does refer to a very similar theory regarding how kingdoms should deal with the neighbors and the enemies and the allies. But it was Kautilya who gave a formal shape to this theory, gave a comprehensive holistic approach which would give a valuable advice to the king regarding how to deal with the neighbors and the allies and the enemies. So, let us take a look at what was proposed by Kautilya under the Mandala theory. As I said, Kautilya urged the king. If you look at this depiction of Mandala theory here, right in the middle of these concentric circles, you can see the kingdom being represented, called the Vijigishu or the aspiring king. So, Kautilya's advice to the aspiring king ruling over the kingdom was to treat the immediate neighbor as a possible Ari, a potential enemy. Why? Because you are sharing an immediate border, so there could be disputes, clashes and tensions leading to enmity and hostility. So, the advice to the king was to treat the immediate neighbor as a potential enemy, as a Ari state. Now, the same logic when you apply this to the neighbor's neighbor, right, the indirect neighbor. Again, the neighboring state would treat the indirect neighbor as a Ari if you apply the same theory and logic, which means the king can cultivate the indirect neighbor, the neighbor's neighbor, and treat the enemy's enemy as a friend. I am sure many of you would have heard of this popular adage, enemy's enemy is a friend. You cultivate your enemy's enemy, build a partnership, an alliance to counter the enemy, because you have a mutual threat, a mutual enemy. So, this is how the Ari Mitra equation was pioneered by Kautilya. Even though the theory predates Kautilya, it was Kautilya who gave a formal shape to this and established this as a comprehensive theory. And Kautilya did not stop at this. He went on to refer to other states present in the vicinity, how you can build a chain of alliances and create counter alliances to protect the interests of the kingdom. He spoke about the other neighbors present in the vicinity, how some of them could align with your Ari, with your enemy, and how it is important to spot those states and form counter alliances to encircle and contain your Aris, your enemies. He refers to a concentric circle of states. This is just a pictorial visualization or representation. So, in the real world, it means that in a given region, right, your country would be bordered by several neighboring states. You will consider them as potential enemies because of the shared resources and the boundaries, which could lead to disputes and enmity. And you consider the indirect neighbor, your neighbor's neighbor, as a friend, cultivate the enemy's enemy as a friend. And this circle goes on. Your enemy would do the same. Your Ari would cultivate such alliances with your other Aris. So, Kautilya spoke about the chain reaction that gets triggered by the policy of containment, the policy of forming military strategic alliances. And he refers to the first and third circles and so on, essentially the odd circles, to be hostile to the Vijigishu, and advises the king to treat all of them with caution, to be cautious while dealing with the immediate neighbor and the friends of the allies of the immediate neighbor, because potentially all of them are aligned together as they have common interests. He advised the Vijigishu state to treat the second and fourth circles as seen in this image here, essentially the enemy's enemy and other like-minded countries, as friendly, because they all have a common enemy, they all have a common interest in countering their common threat. So, this advice is pure gold and it remains relevant even today in today's geopolitics. And Kautilya also stated that this is not a hard and fast rule, this is just a theory. In the real world, things might be slightly different. Not all your neighbors might be enemies, maybe some neighbors could turn out to be a Ari state, right? But of course, there will be exceptions. You also can't assume that enemy's enemy will be a friend. The enemy's enemy might turn out to be Udasina, meaning a neutral state who may not prefer to choose sides between two other states which are fighting against each other. Or the enemy's enemy might turn out to be a Madhyama who is indifferent to the dispute between the other two countries. The Madhyama can be wooed. Maybe the Madhyama can be pushed to either become an ally, or the Madhyama could align with the enemy depending on the context, depending on the circumstances. So, Kautilya had the vision, the far-sightedness to categorize the neighboring states and the countries in the region based on this theory. This is like a precautionary advice to the king. It is like an early warning. It is a forecasting system on how you should deal with other countries, develop interstate relations, cultivate allies, build alliances, and ensure that your core interests are protected. So, Kautilya talks about the Udasina states, the neutral states. Some of them could choose to be neutral, some of them could be Madhyama who are indifferent to the dispute or the conflict between other two countries. So, Kautilya advised the king that a king should build alliances, build allies, cultivate the enemy's enemies and build partnerships with them, and convince others to be Udasina or neutral. If they are not ready to ally with you to counter the common enemy, at least the king should ensure that the country becomes neutral. And the Madhyama states which are indifferent, they represent a risk. They might align with the enemy because they are not statedly neutral. The enemy might woo the Madhyama. So, before that can happen, the king should woo the Madhyama, convince the Madhyama state to be neutral or ally with the kingdom. This was the pivotal advice given to the king under the Mandala theory. Essentially, treat your immediate neighbors as potential threats, cultivate enemy's enemy as a friend, look at the Udasina states in the region who are neutral, ensure they remain neutral or they should ally with you. Look at the Madhyama states who are indifferent, who are not taking a stand on a particular dispute between two countries, who don't show any concern about a particular dispute. Ensure that you bring them on your side by building alliances with Madhyama states as well, or at least convince them to be neutral if ever there is a conflict with the Ari state, because your Ari might woo the Madhyama as well. This was the advice given to the king under the Mandala theory by Kautilya. Now let us quickly apply this into the current context. In fact, that is the whole purpose of this session, to understand one theory of Kautilya in each session and apply that in India's foreign policy and contemporary geopolitics. So I would like to quickly take you through certain examples of how we can apply Mandala theory to Indian foreign policy or strategies and apply this in contemporary geopolitical world order. One classic example would be the equation between India, Pakistan and China. Right from 1947, as an immediate neighbor, Pakistan became a hostile state to India, as anticipated, predicted by Kautilya. An immediate neighbor has the potential to become an Ari, and that's exactly what Pakistan became, as it raised the Kashmir issue against India, instigating the first war over Kashmir. Since then, since independence, since partition, India, Pakistan have been hostile to each other, and Pakistan has been the primary instigator. Later in the 1950s, as tensions developed with China over the question of Tibet, over the boundary issue, and eventually when China attacked India in 1962 and fought a war against India, naturally the two Aris would come together. Pakistan would see India as hostile and China would see India as hostile. By 1960s, a strategic alliance was formed between Pakistan and China. In fact, in 1963, China-Pakistan signed a boundary agreement, the Sino-Pakistan Boundary Agreement, through which Pakistan gave away a part of Indian territory in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir called the Shaksgam Valley. The Shaksgam Valley is part of Gilgit-Baltistan region, which should be part of Indian territory. But since 1947, Pakistan is under the illegal occupation of parts of J&K and Gilgit-Baltistan, which we refer to as POK, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So this Indian territory, illegally occupied by Pakistan, was leased away by Pakistan to China in 1963 through the Sino-Pakistan Boundary Agreement. And even today, China maintains control at Shaksgam Valley. China has deployed troops. The PLA has a major military presence in Shaksgam Valley, which is Indian territory. China, Pakistan have major projects which they have taken up that passes through Shaksgam Valley, which is Indian territory. So as soon as the enmities and hostilities developed between India, China and India, Pakistan, as per Mandala theory of Kautilya, it was natural for China, Pakistan to align together, to work together. China started treating Pakistan as a proxy to target India. China helped Pakistan in its militarization. As many of you know, if Pakistan could modernize its military with latest military technology, from ballistic missiles to fighter jets to naval ships and submarines, it is largely due to Chinese assistance. China has transferred technology, sold advanced weaponry to Pakistan to essentially set up Pakistan as a mighty proxy against India. If you look at Pakistan's nuclear program, it has been largely supported by China. China proliferated, leaked nuclear secrets and material to enable Pakistan develop nuclear weapons that would counter India's nuclear weapons program. So, be it Pakistan's military modernization, its development of ballistic missiles and development of nuclear weapons, China has been right behind Pakistan. That shows the nexus between the two Aris of India, the two enemies of India, the two hostile neighboring states of India. You look at the diplomatic support China gives to Pakistan even today at platforms like United Nations. China keeps shielding Pakistan. As you know, China is a P5 member, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and uses its leverage and veto power to protect Pakistan whenever India accuses Pakistan of sponsoring terrorism. China turns a blind eye to Pakistan's state sponsorship of terrorism against India. And there are several instances in northeast India, in Kashmir, where allegedly Chinese and Pakistani intelligence agencies have worked together, supported each other to back terrorism and insurgency against India. So this remains the challenge for India in the region, and as brought out by Kautilya in the Mandala Theory, the two neighbors of India with whom we had hostilities ended up becoming friends of each other. The China-Pakistan Nexus remains a challenge and continues to pose a two-front threat to India. A possible situation where China-Pakistan could both simultaneously go to war with India, creating a possible two-front scenario that would be a nightmare for us. So for India's strategic establishment, a possible two-front conflict with both China and Pakistan remains one of the biggest challenges. Now, China and Pakistan have taken this relationship to the next level. You might have heard of the CPEC corridor, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is an integral part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. How China is trying to develop direct access to Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf in order to reduce its dependency on Malacca Strait. It's working with Pakistan to establish this corridor consisting of road and railway lines, industrial corridors, strategic ports. China has already built the strategic Gwadar port in the Baloch province, in the Balochistan province of Pakistan. It has modernized the Karachi port as well, which are gateways of Pakistan into the Arabian Sea and into the Indian Ocean. Now, India strongly opposes this corridor because the alignment of the project passes through POK, passes through Gilgit-Baltistan and Shaksgam Valley, which is Indian territory claimed by India but under the illegal occupation of Pakistan. And these Chinese projects pass through POK, which is essentially Indian territory, thus violating our sovereignty. So no wonder India boycotted the Belt and Road Initiative, as CPEC is an integral component of this project. So it shows the economic and strategic alliance between China and Pakistan, and they would go to any extent to undermine India's interests, including India's sovereignty. Now, what is India doing in this regard? How can India draw lessons from the Mandala Theory, apply the lessons of Mandala Theory to counter Pakistan and China? Let's take a quick look. If Pakistan, China saw each other as allies because they had a common enemy, that is India. Similarly, India has always seen Afghanistan as that indirect neighbor, as the Ari's Ari who can be a Mitra. Especially when Afghanistan had a civilian government from 2001 to 2021. India got very close to the Afghan civilian government. We invested more than $3 billion in the country. India built key projects from the Kabul Parliament to the Salma Dam to the highways in Afghanistan, which would open up new routes for India to connect with Central Asia as well. India built close strategic relations and defense relations with the then Afghan government. We gave military supplies, military training, and Pakistan would even allege that Indian and Afghan intelligence agencies are working together to sponsor few groups in Pakistan to target the Pakistani state. Pakistan kept alleging that the NDS, the then intelligence agency of the Afghan government, was working with India's RAW to sponsor the Baloch and Sindh outfits and the TTP, Pakistan Taliban, to target the Pakistani state, even though Pakistan never gave any proof or evidence to establish that. And also India denies any such involvement. But there were allegations that India and Afghanistan were working together to contain Pakistan. So an example of working with the Ari's Ari, building a friendly relationship with the enemy's enemy. So similarly, India has tried building buffers against Chinese aggression and expansionism. When China annexed Tibet in 1950 and displayed its aggressive expansionist tendencies, immediately India cultivated a close security partnership with the Himalayan states like Nepal, Bhutan and even Sikkim, which at that point was an independent state. We signed the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Nepal, setting up open borders with Nepal, providing defense and military support to Nepal and economic assistance. So Nepal could act as a buffer state for India against any possible Chinese aggression. Similarly, Bhutan has been successfully cultivated as a buffer by India. In 1949, India-Bhutan signed a treaty through which Bhutan outsourced its foreign policy to India, to be guided by India in its foreign policy. It accepted India's military and defense support and agreed to protect India's interests, and in return India promised not to interfere, not to meddle in the internal affairs of Bhutan. Today, Bhutan faces a major land boundary issue with China. There are three places along the China-Bhutan border where there is a standing dispute at Doklam, Jakarlung and Pasamlung. And China of late has gotten very aggressive at Doklam, and India fully supports and encourages Bhutan to stand up to Chinese aggression. We have facilitated the boundary talks as well between China and Bhutan since 1984, and India remains the most influential power in Bhutan, and Bhutan as a buffer helps protect Indian interests against the Chinese aggression. Thanks to India-Bhutan relations, we have been able to preserve the integrity of Doklam, which China has been challenging, because Doklam is very close to strategic areas like Siliguri corridor and the Nathula Pass, which are vulnerable points for India. And even though China got aggressive at Doklam, Bhutan did not budge, and it stood with India as India countered the Chinese aggression. So both India and China work together. We are assisting Bhutan even today in the boundary talks, but we do have some concerns emerging here. So this again shows how we can work with the Ari's Ari. Just like India, China have hostilities, China, Bhutan have a history of tensions and boundary disputes. So it's only natural for India, Bhutan to work together despite some differences we have, and today we are able to contain Chinese aggression, at least in this region. Now if you look at the broader Indian Ocean region, the theory gets even more interesting. See, over the last 2 to 3 decades, China has made a big foray into the Indian Ocean with the aim of containing India, encircling India, basically which is the application of the Mandala Theory. China has invested in strategic projects, for example, the Kyaukphyu port in Myanmar, the Chittagong port in Bangladesh, Hambantota in Sri Lanka and as well as Colombo. It has invested across West Asia, East Africa as well. In Kenya, China is a major investor in the historic Mombasa port, the Lamu port in Kenya. It has built the Bagamoyo and Dar es Salaam ports in Tanzania. It has invested in Mozambique. In fact, China has even set up its first foreign military base in Djibouti in East Africa, near the Horn of Africa. And this country of Djibouti is strategically located near Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is a link between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, a vital shipping lane on which even India depends. This is the region near Horn of Africa which is affected by Somalian piracy, and China has been able to set up a naval base which is China's first foreign military base in Djibouti, right. So across West Asia as well, China has invested heavily in imported infrastructure projects. In Pakistan as well, we just looked at the CPEC project. Most of our neighbors have joined the Belt and Road Initiative of China, from Nepal to Myanmar to Sri Lanka to Maldives. Maldives has leased an entire island to China. So the growing economic, military and diplomatic influence of China across the Indian Ocean around India does represent a threat. It's a Chinese encirclement strategy which is popularly referred to as the string of pearls strategy of China. This again can be explained with the Mandala Theory. Now India counters this with a strategy of counter encirclement. India also has made strategic investments all across the Indian Ocean, and we are focusing on the broader Indo-Pacific today. We have invested in the Sitwe port in Myanmar as part of Kaladan project. India is an investor in the Mongla Chittagong ports of Bangladesh. We have gained the West Container Terminal project at Colombo. India's Adani Ports has recently won a contract to develop the West Container Terminal at Colombo port that establishes Indian presence as well at Colombo, which can help counter the Chinese presence. India has built the strategic Chabahar port in Iran, through which we can link with Afghanistan and Central Asia. Recently, Indian Navy has been given access to the strategic Duqm port in Oman and the Sabang port of Indonesia. That increases our operational reach. We can get logistical support from Oman and Indonesia through these naval ports, which increases the deployment range and the operational range of Indian Navy. Adani Ports also has gained a project at the strategic Haifa port in Israel. We have proposed the IMEC corridor at the G20, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, with United States and other interested allies. By using the close strategic partnership with United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, we have proposed this IMEC corridor that will link India with West Asia. The corridor will connect all the way until Jordan and Israel, and will be further extended to link with Greece, Italy, France and Germany. So if this economic corridor were to be realized, this would be a counter encirclement strategy of India to contain Chinese presence and influence. If you look at the broader Indian Ocean, India has stepped up its naval deployment across East Africa, near Horn of Africa. Even we are building close ties with Kenya, Tanzania and even the island countries, especially Seychelles and Mauritius and Madagascar. Recently, Mauritius leased the Agalega Island to India and India has built strategic infrastructure at Agalega Islands. And we have also got lease over Assumption Island in Seychelles, even though the project has not taken off. But still India gaining access to these strategic islands from Assumption to Agalega is a clear strategy being employed by India to counter the Chinese influence. We are repairing our ties with Maldives, stepping up our influence in Maldives and Sri Lanka and across the Indian Ocean region to contain the rising Chinese presence and influence. And similarly, if China can step into India's backyard and build these alliances with our neighbors and immediate neighbors, so can India in China's backyard, which is South China Sea. As China has gotten more aggressive and picked disputes with multiple Southeast Asian countries, India has stepped into the region, built strategic alliances with Vietnam, Philippines and many others. We have very close defense relations with Vietnam, right? We recently exported the BrahMos cruise missile to Philippines that strengthens the deterrence of Philippines against the aggression of the Chinese Navy and Coast Guard with regard to the ongoing disputes. We have stepped up our defense relations under Act East policy with the countries over here to create a encirclement strategy. And again, you can see the Mandala Theory in action. Coming to the Quad grouping, across the Indo-Pacific, 4 like-minded democracies have come together to contain Chinese aggression. India is aligned with Japan, Australia and United States to ensure that rules-based order is followed and protected across the Indo-Pacific region. Though India has ensured that Quad doesn't become a military bloc, it has ensured that it is a platform to enforce the international rules such as UN Convention on Law of the Sea and ensure that the stability across Indo-Pacific is protected and free and open nature of Indo-Pacific is protected. So this again shows the larger strategy of encirclement and counter encirclement, which is directly derived from Mandala Theory. Now I am not saying all countries are following Kautilya's Mandala Theory, no. When you are looking at current geopolitics, the current issues and conflicts and hostilities, as a student, right, you can draw from Mandala Theory of Kautilya, apply that theory, apply that philosophy to improve your strategic thinking. Coming to my last point, there is another alliance which has come up recently which is of concern to India. Pakistan's recent nexus with Turkey, Azerbaijan, which involves China as well. See, China, Pakistan already had a nexus, right? Now Turkey and Azerbaijan have aligned together with regard to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, where Azerbaijan fought a war against Armenia. Pakistan stood with Azerbaijan, Turkey also supported Azerbaijan in the conflict. Now in return, Azerbaijan has created problems for India. To return the favor to Pakistan, Azerbaijan has taken a stand against Kashmir. It has voted against India, accused India of committing violations in Kashmir, meddling with our internal matters. Turkey has done the same. Under Recep Erdogan, Turkey has projected itself as a leader of the Muslim world. It has aligned with Pakistan and it has taken a stand against India, meddling with our internal matters including Kashmir and issues like Article 370, the anti-CAA protests, etc. Such internal matters of India were unnecessarily taken up by Turkey and Azerbaijan in order to show their support to Pakistan. China has done the same. So this nexus which has come up between Pakistan, Turkey and Azerbaijan, the trilateral they have formed with China's blessings, is a direct concern for India. It is an encirclement strategy. Now drawing from Mandala Theory, India has a counter encirclement strategy. We are working with Greece and Armenia to counter this nexus. In the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, India took a side. We sided with Armenia as Azerbaijan became hostile by aligning with Pakistan, and today India has become one of the biggest suppliers of weapons to Armenia. From advanced missiles and rockets to radars and ammunition, India has become the biggest supplier of military hardware and military technology to Armenia. This has strengthened our defense relations and improved our presence and influence across the Eurasia region. Recently, last year, Prime Minister Modi visited Greece, the first major visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 4 decades, because Turkey and Greece have a dispute going on. In the Mediterranean, Turkey has claimed Cyprus and territories and exclusive economic zone belonging to Greece. So over the Cyprus issue, over the territorial issues in the Mediterranean, Turkey and Greece are at conflict. So if Turkey has sided with Pakistan and Azerbaijan, both of which are meddling with India, it's only natural for India to align with Greece and Armenia as well. This explains PM Modi's visit to Greece last year. It explains India's defense exports to Armenia, where India has become the biggest military hardware supplier to Armenia in the ongoing conflict. Even though Azerbaijan defeated Armenia and captured most of the Nagorno-Karabakh region, the tensions remain between them. So if Pakistan, China are trying to encircle India by working with maybe other Madhyama states, you can say that Turkey at one point was largely indifferent. It was even neutral at one point, a Udasina state. But now, with changing circumstances, it has aligned with India's aris, Pakistan and China. Azerbaijan, which had nothing personal with India, because of circumstances has aligned with China, Pakistan. Otherwise, Azerbaijan could have been seen as either a Madhyama state, an indifferent state or a Udasina state. But they have sided with our aris, thus becoming hostile states for India. So, to counter them, we need to form similar strategies, and that's why India works with Greece and Armenia. Work with your aris ari. Create those strategies and those alliances. Turn even Madhyama and Udasina states in your favor. That is exactly what a country should be doing to protect its interests. That is what we learn from the Mandala Theory of Kautilya. On this note, I would like to bring the first episode to an end. So it's been a quick and precise, concise discussion of Kautilya's thought, how it applies to contemporary geopolitics. So do support this initiative. We would keep running this as a limited series every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Join me every Wednesday, so that we can pick up different theories from Arthashastra, from Kautilya's thought, and we'll try to link that with India's foreign policy and contemporary geopolitics. In the coming weeks, there are many, many more exciting concepts, from Kautilya's view on war, diplomacy to espionage, right? There are many interesting concepts that we can cover. So do support the initiative with more comments. If you are liking the initiative that we have started, do let us know. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. I'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Take care. Have a good day.